Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Listeners, welcome back to Making Data Simple. I am here with Peter Wang, who's the co-founder and CEO of Anaconda. Peter, I think you were with me a couple of years ago, weren't you? I looked it up and it was like 2020, something like that.
In the before times. COVID, ChatGPT, you name it. Everything's different.
But still an Anaconda.
Python's still a thing, it turns out. So,
well, we kind of knew it would be a thing. That's fantastic. Well, it's great to have you back. Thank you. I hope you listened to the podcast a little bit. I've got some good questions lined up for you today. But as a quick intro to Peter, again, you'd have to go back, I think, to 2020. We're doing this a little while, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump in, and this will be fresh because, it was pre-COVID, which is a whole different world. Peter is the Chief AI and Innovation Officer and co-founder of Anaconda. He leads Anaconda's AI Incubator. He advances, as he mentioned, core Python technologies and developing new frontiers in open source and AI and machine learning. And I think that's especially in the area of edge computing, data privacy, and decentralized computing. Welcome back, man. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation.
Same. All right. But now I gave you the intro. So give us a little bit of your history, your experience, and you can already dive into what you've been doing the last couple of years.
Yeah. So my history experience was that I've actually been using Python since about 1999. And I was a C++ programmer. Before that, I was a physicist. And I was just doing, a bunch of software development stuff in numerical computing, things like that. I picked up Python and then started doing consulting with Python for numerical computing. And a lot of that is prediction, right? Whether it's in science and engineering, whether it's in the financial markets. Python was starting to get used a lot in the late aughts for doing this kind of stuff, more so than other languages. And that's when I saw the opportunity to really take it beyond the niche areas of engineering computation and numerical computing, what some people might have called high performance computing, supercomputers, stuff like that, into the realm of doing data analytics for business computing purposes, for business prediction, for modeling and risk simulation. And then that was right when the big data wave started hitting, and Hadoop and all these things. And a lot of people started moving to cloud. And I saw the opportunity that Python could be a transformative tool for doing predictive data analytics. Now we call it data science, of course, and then machine learning leading on behind that. But I saw the opportunity for Python to be a very powerful tool, a very expressive tool. And this is the most important part, a very accessible tool. And that was the weird thing that when we started doing consulting with Python, me and my co-founder now, he was just another consultant with me back in those days. We noticed that the kinds of people who were using Python were not traditional software devs. In fact, they got a lot of flack from like Java devs and C++, C# devs. The Python people tended to be domain experts, or they tended to be quants or engineers. They knew the mathematical questions they wanted to answer, but they were not really software engineers by sort of, the traditional sense of a software engineer. So we saw that Python could be this bridge technology that would enable sort of these domain experts, subject matter experts, I think sometimes they're called in industry SMEs, right? They could then take Python and apply that to their problem, harness a tremendous amount of computation, and get their jobs done very quickly. So that's continued, I think, the march of progress now. It's almost weird to look back and say, well, of course, Python's the thing. When we started, man, it was a weird niche thing. People looked at me weird. I show up at big data conferences hawking Python. So that's kind of brings us to today. Last few years, I've been really focused. Well, I was the CEO for about 4 years. And then just in January of this year, I really leaned into leading some of the AI efforts and really in the incubation and sort of innovation areas, because there's simply too much going on. As a business, we're scaling and growing, which has been fantastic, and there's lots to manage there. But then my particular interest in my heart is in the innovation side, right? And with so much happening in AI, all these questions on open versus closed, risk versus reproducibility, and all these things, I felt like I just needed to dive into that, feet first and really get into all that.
Were you like sick of the CEO role? You just said, I'm done with it. I want to get more technical.
It's not a glamorous job. I mean, I didn't start as the CEO. I started as the founding CTO, actually.
Yes.
I took over the CTO role in the fall of 19, really in an interim capacity. And then I ran the company for 4 years and grew it, took it through our Series B, scaled it some more. And then last year, 2023 was such an important year in terms of that was the first sort of year after ChatGPT's release. And also there's a lot of stuff happening in the financial markets. So at that point, it was clear that I could not both be the CEO and do all these innovation things, these deep dives I want to do on the AI side of things. I was personally quite torn about that. And so that's what leads me to my current role and the things I've been working on recently.
Fantastic. Hey, one thing before I begin, like Anaconda is a distribution of the Python and R programming languages, is it not?
Yep.
But you never mention R. Why not?
Well, I mean, we're best known for the Python stuff, right?
Okay.
But the interesting thing about our packaging technology, sort of what's at the heart of Anaconda, is that we essentially built a user-land open source packaging system that is almost like if you were to take a Linux distribution like Red Hat or Debian or something like this, and you made it specific for data analysis and you made it cross-platform on all the operating systems. That's really what Anaconda is. So we distribute a lot of C++ and Fortran as alongside as well as Python. And yes, as you point out, we also distribute R.
But what differentiates Anaconda? I mean, nobody else doing this? Who are the competitors out there?
Well, there's a lot of, I would say there's not really very many commercial competitors that are at the scale we're at. We're embedded in Excel now. We're embedded in Snowflake. We're in Watson. We're in Azure. It's just sort of, we're just at this kind of scale. But additionally, the task of IBM, Red Hat, y'all know how hard it is actually to build someone else's open source, make sure it works, test it, backport, and do maintenance, release the bug fixes. Those things are not very sexy, interesting things for a lot of open source devs, but they're things that people need, especially people in enterprise. They need that kind of a thing. So our competitor really from a end user perspective is a lot of the open source technologies where people use pip and they install wheels, and that kind of works, and sometimes it blows up, but they don't really have to think a lot about their software supply chain. But for people who are doing serious open source work or where the open source is in serious environments, that's where they really do need this kind of vendor support. And that's hence, our partnership with watsonx is part of that, to make sure that when people are running their AI models in Watson, that they have not only the cutting edge models from IBM, but that they have peace of mind relative to the open source ecosystem that's going in and powering those models.
Hey, I got to take a pause real quick because I think you told me this last time, but why Anaconda? Why the name? I know it's like the biggest snake or the heaviest snake in the world.
Anaconda was because I realized that we needed to take the scientific Python software stack and sort of rebrand it, do a marketing swizzle on it to make it Python for big data. So I figured Python for big data, big snake, Anaconda, it's just sort of rolled off the tongue. The unfortunate thing is I'm not really a huge fan of snakes. Like I'm actually, I have friends who like them and that's great. Like that's their thing. I'm not one of those people. So now I have a company and a product that I created and named after a kind of animal that I'm not a huge fan of. So
now you probably have to go to a conference and they want to bring an anaconda and wrap it around your neck or something for publicity.
No, hopefully not. We've had that on one occasion and then never again. We did bring Sir Mix-a-Lot onto one of our virtual conferences, wow. And so there's the other reference to Anaconda that also gets brought up sometimes.
Anaconda don't want none. Yeah,
that's right. Yep, you got it.
Yeah, see, everybody knows that song.
Everyone knows that song.
All right, very cool. Look, but so you give up the CEO role. Or I don't know how exactly that played out, but you're no longer in the CEO role. Now you're Anaconda's AI, or you're leading the AI Incubator. What does that mean?
Well, we looked at, last year when when ChatGPT, I call it the chattening, right, announced to the world that this thing was here now. GPT-3 had been around for a long time, actually. People were messing around with GPT for years. And then ChatGPT landed. I actually first started paying attention to the modern wave of AI with the GAN, generative adversarial networks, style GAN, things like that, image transfer. But with last year, it was clear that something major was happening. Something was emerging out of these LLMs and the embedding models. But it was also not quite clear what was our role in that space. We're not going to go and raise $1 billion to go build a foundation model, only having it blown away the following year or the following 6 months by some other company, right? That didn't seem like an interesting thing for us to go do. We looked at how could this be used for, open source and open source communities. We looked at what's the future of democratized data analysis. We looked at a number of these different angles and realized that while there were some things that were pretty clear that were important to be done, there were also a number of other things that needed research and needed partnership with community members. And so we established some principles about what we felt were the values of Anaconda as a company and as a community leader in the open source Python movement. and extending those values into the AI space. What does that mean, right? We can't do all the things, and no one really is asking us to do all the things, but there are some things which we have a differentiated point of view on. And so we want to push on those areas. And that's why for things like edge and distributed computing, working on having more transparent models, for certainly open models is another big thing. We feel like this technology should be something that everyone in the world has access to and is able to build on and understand what they're building from, having some transparency around it. So those are the areas that we started pushing into. And so the point of the incubator really is to have a space where we can be talking to these kinds of research groups, looking at things that are more researchy, figuring out when are things that are ready to kind of bring into the fold into a product perspective, what are things that actually should be sort of done outside of Anaconda. It's really that sort of remit that the incubator has.
Let me follow up with a question on that. I recently attended a LinkedIn sales conference, and they had Matt Dixon there talking about, he's the writer of the Challenger Customer and also the Challenger Sale. And he was talking about his take on AI. And he was saying, look, I think it's a mix of FOMO and FOMO, meaning fear of missing out and fear of messing up, both together. That the boards of every company is saying, hey, you got to get in the space. Don't get left out. However, nobody really understands, this is his words, nobody really understands how it works. It almost appears to be magic. And the suggestion that they did give, actually a suggestion I buy into, something that I've been suggesting to my customers, is to not focus on the AI strategy or a company's AI strategy, focus more on the immediate next win, like within a 6-month time period to get started. But let me pause there. What is your take on the advent of Gen AI? Has it helped your business? Where is it today? What is it and what is it not?
Well, Gen AI is only the first incarnation of where some of these deep learning technologies, the next level of deep learning technologies could take us. Certainly, it's the thing that has the most commercial impact for the most number of industries right now, the most obvious commercial impact. You could see that it might displace people who are, writing or making movies or music. There's a lot of this kind of copycat interpolation kind of stuff that people are using. And people hold up those use cases as this is just another kind of copyright appropriation or intellectual property theft, or these things are not very original, creative, and they sort of put all of AI in that pigeonhole. While some of those critiques of the early applications might be valid, at the end of the day, the amazing thing is that we used a relatively naive and brute force algorithm, transformers, to do this kind of embedding model that is able to generate, the algorithm is able to sort of turn electricity into not quite thought, but something that only humans could do before from a cognitive perspective. And so what I'm trying to say is that generative AI is only actually the first sort of distillation or concretization of some of the capabilities that we're getting from these AI approaches. There's a whole slew of additional AI research being done that will lead to amazing kinds of breakthroughs for humanity. So to ignore that as a reality is, I think, really having your head in the sand, right? There's definitely some stuff that's going to happen. At the same time, if you're a board member who, barely knows how to write his own email, you're be stuck just reading high level swags of what this is and what this isn't. You're not going to have a very good read. It's like trying to read the Sunday newspaper about what's happening, in Europe during World War II. By the time you read about it, it's already done and happened, 2 months ago, right? So there's, I think, this idea that if you are a board, or even if you're management and you're not very clear on this stuff, you've got to actually put resources to lean in on the kinds of technical talent that can make sense of this and can tell you a bit more about what these things are. I think being too dismissive of it is almost like a cope, right? But the advice about focusing on what you can do over the next 6 months, I think that is actually fairly good advice. That look at what other people, if you don't have the ability yourself to understand what it is or what might happen, or you're not tied into some researchers that you really trust, then you really do have to look at, it's like you're on the other side of the chasm. You're not on the innovator side, you're on the adopter side, and you got to look at what other people are actually having success with and learn from that. And that's okay, because there's a lot of great stuff there too, right now even, right? But it's not going to be perfect, and you should proceed with care around some of that. But it's still, like the use cases people have for internal knowledge-based kinds of things, customer support kinds of things. Those are all really interesting use cases that people can adopt now.
Where does Python come in? What use cases are you seeing on the most regular basis?
Well, all these AI models, the research is being done in Python. The new kinds of approach, like when people implement the models, they're implemented in Python. And when you have to go and munge a bunch of the data, by munge, I mean, manipulate it, slice it, dice it, play with the training data, plot the training loss curves, do all these kinds of things. All of that is really being done in Python. There's some cutting edge stuff being done in C++. Some people will do these in other languages, but Python is the predominant language of AI at this point in time. The way that's kind of lifted our business is that I think, if you think about where PyData and Python for data analysis was, that's a useful thing. That's a disruptor for the entire BI category. That's great. But compared to the use of AI like everywhere, it's the TAM is much bigger on where could AI run. So just the places where people want to run Python expands greatly. People care a lot more about Python performance as well, right? Because these AI models require high performance. If you're running them in the edge, where you have lower power and lesser memory, you care about performance as well, but you care about efficiency. And so for all of these things, people care about doing Python well. They're starting to pay a lot more attention to where the package is coming from, because these things are getting deployed into sensitive environments. So this kind of stuff, the supply chain security, all that stuff is accelerating the maturation and the evolution of the Python ecosystem.
But could you say more on the differentiation that Anaconda brings? You wouldn't need to use Anaconda's UI, or you wouldn't need to use, a certified distribution.
Yeah, well, so there are actually a few things. Not only the security aspect, it's the Conda packaging technology that we created and still maintain, which is an open source technology, just like RPM, Red Hat. That's a open source technology. So I want to separate that technology from the commercial service that Anaconda provides. They're actually two separate things. There's advantages to both. So the packaging technology that we have is different than I would say the sort of popular standard of Python packaging, which is pip, in that we carefully track the C and C++ and other kinds of dependencies that a Python library might need. So you have visibility into that. You can pin to a particular version of like a GPU driver. So you can actually have a much easier time getting your stack stood up, knowing that it's going to work with this version of the GPU, knowing that it's going to work with that version of the Linux kernel. Those are the kinds of things that actually matter a lot in the workflow. So the Conda packaging technology is, I would say, superior in this sense, and that you have visibility into these things. And if you need to tie two of these models together, if you need to have like an image recognition thing that then does some Fourier transform, some other data processing, and then it does some additional generative stuff out here with PyTorch, that whole pipeline, you want really all that to work in a single project. You need all those pieces to be compatible with each other. That's where Conda really shines. And that's just our open source packaging technology. Then there's the commercial usage of Anaconda itself for businesses that care about understanding what's in their software stack. I mean, I think it just sort of goes without saying that you really would want to have a vendor that's able to tell you when things have security updates, when they're broken, who can actually help you understand the footprint of Python inside your business. That's something we've come across a lot. I would say that's been surprising in the last 6 months, that we've talked to more and more customers who say, well, I don't know how much Python we are using. I don't know if anyone is using Python. And then we show them how to set up and run a scan internally, and they have a lot more users than they thought they did, because everyone's using Python. They're just picking up and doing stuff with it. And then the IT folks are like, holy cow, we need to have a way of getting visibility into all this footprint. We need to have a way of pushing out patches. We need to have a way of limiting our exposure to certain kinds of open source licenses that might lead to legal exposure for us. All those kinds of things are the things that our commercial tools provide for people. And that's where a lot of the value is.
Do you think clients are getting the security aspects here? I know that sounds like a very strange question, but they're using all kinds of large language models that have copyrighted material and all kinds of security flaws through them. And I don't know, it feels like there's a large part of the industry now just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes, that is true. And with LLMs and copyright, that's a whole nother, that's a fun discussion which we could have. But that's different than, for instance, if you are somewhat negligent in your general software security posture, right? The usage of open source software in applications for businesses that's not new. That's been going on for 40 years. And so, especially with the executive orders that have come down the pike and the NIST standards around software supply chain and SBOM, software bill of materials, businesses they have a hard time pretending they didn't know they should be having a better security posture with regards to the third-party open source they bring into their firewall. And that's separable from, I think, the LLM thing, which you're absolutely right. Most people want to use LLMs. They don't want to think too hard about it. They're waiting for the lawsuits to sort of resolve, and everyone's just kind of YOLOing it. I think that's different.
Well, do you think that is that because the LLMs are somebody else's problem, whereas the software inside my development environment, I'm liable?
The LLMs are someone else's problem. The LLMs, there's not that many. How many pieces of open source software are in the world? Millions and millions and millions. How many LLMs are people actually using? On the order of not even 100? So there's a lot more correlation, which means that there's a bit of, I think, a sense of safety in numbers, right? Like if they go after, like if you use Llama and I use Llama and then a million other people use Llama, if they come after me for using Llama, they're going to have to come after a million other people as well. And I'm pretty sure the Meta lawyers will file an amicus brief of some sort or the other and whatnot. You got companies like Anthropic and OpenAI trying to offer an indemnity to users on this kind of stuff. So I think there's a sense of safety in numbers that there are so few models, period, that many people are then believing that they're just one fish out of a million fish that are all using that model.
Just as a quick summary and a clear repeat, I'm going to ask the question a little bit differently, the differentiation question. If I said, hey, Peter's a nice guy, but I'm going to use Python. I'm going to go without Anaconda. Mm-hmm. What would you caution? Where are they going to fail?
There's two ways that they can fail. Number one, Python packaging is an area where it is full of potholes and landmines. And so while it might be easy to get something going, you then can eventually run into a problem. You're like, God, life sucks. Python packaging sucks. I hate all this. And if you'd actually used Conda to start with, a lot of that stuff could have been easier for you, right? The second thing is if you're doing this in a business environment, especially if you're doing AI stuff, you really have to think about not just what you're doing today, but what's going to happen down the road. And many people, I think, packaging and environment management is not the sexiest thing for them. It's not the funnest thing in the world. They kind of want to just get it done, get it out of the way, and start doing their real work. And that's okay. But if you don't do that right, then you're creating a lot of security technical debt that down the road is going to be either your problem or someone else's problem to have to go and unhose. And so if you use Anaconda as a source of at least some of those baseline packages where there are binaries, opaque binaries that you're deploying into environments that are touching customer data and things like that, then you have actually a vendor that you can talk to. You have a vendor that you can go to for support. You have a vendor you can go to say, look, I read about this vulnerability. Is this package vulnerable or not? So we play well with a lot of the other tools in the space around open source security scanning and vulnerability management. We're certainly a tool and product in that space. But we specialize in making sure that the Python bits are done really well. And so there's very few false positives with us, certainly very few false negatives. And so we are, I would say that's really the value add is for someone who's doing this in a serious way. You really should be using us. There's just really no excuse not to.
If you do just a search on Anaconda, mm-hmm. It's your advertisement or your branding is going to be the operating system for AI. Now, I know mm-hmm. Python does a lot of things, but tell me about the branding and essentially what you're trying to do there.
So our view is that models will get smaller. Models are going to be deployed in more and more places, whether through quantization or through fine-tuning. They're going to get smaller and more specialized. So people will be doing essentially software in a new way. And doing that software in a new way, it looks a lot like, some of it's going to be traditional software and some of it's going to be looking like composing models together and pulling all these things together. And when you do that, you're going to want to put those models as close to the point of either data collection or decisioning. You want to put those as close to those things as possible. And this is where the edge and decentralized stuff comes in. So we think that if you want to actually deploy these high performance, efficient, and secure data-oriented Python workloads in many different places, then you're going to need something that abstracts a lot of that complexity away for you. You're going to want someone that is trusted in terms of getting all the bits and pieces coming in from the open source world as well as from the model world, right? Do you want a quantization that you download off a Hugging Face created by some random user ID, or do you want a quantization from actually a vendor that you could call up if there's some problem with it, right? So all these different pieces come in and essentially expand the scope of what all goes into an open source development approach with AI, and then the number of people who want to deploy these things, the number of places they want to deploy them, all these things just are going to expand in number. And we see that our experiences with the open source community, we see that our experiences in vending these open source, valuable open source artifacts to businesses, we think that gives us a very unique perspective on what is needed to catalyze that, to make that really go and go smoothly for users.
IBM is my employer, as many of the folks on the podcast certainly know. But you mentioned a partnership with watsonx, and I wouldn't have brought it up. But I'd like you to talk to me about that partnership. What does that look like? And for those listening, watsonx, hopefully you know, but that is IBM's AI platform. We have AI governance and data, 3 parts of that platform. But how are you partnering with watsonx?
So that is precisely the secure Python, the secure sort of enterprise grade packaging that of Python. So when you are wanting to develop new kinds of models or deploy them on watsonx, you have access there to our enterprise grade packages. You can spin up a version of our package server so that you can actually have everything cached locally. You can go and make sure that when, for instance, many times people want to do things like tool usage, right? They have a LLM that generates some code that then runs some stuff. Well, that's a little dicey sometimes because the LLM could generate code that's using a package that you shouldn't be using. Or you have company policies that says really you can only use these versions of these libraries because those are the ones that are approved. How do you ensure that for what the LLM uses? How do you ensure that your AI development falls within those parameters? So we have, our partnership with watsonx makes it so that you can have access to these things inside your AI development deployment environment in Watson. And I will say kudos, by the way, to the IBM Watson team in building the Granite model in that we talked earlier about the copyright YOLO stuff. Granite is one of the very few that's quite transparent about the data sets that go into it.
Absolutely.
Right. It's a little shocking to me. I mean, I would say this in the spirit of partnership. I'm surprised IBM is not shouting this louder from the rooftops, right? Because it is such a differentiated thing. Most of the other models out there, they're like, oh, we're an open source model. Well, sure, the source code for the model is open, but the weights are free. But what made those weights? Well, they don't want to talk about it, right? And so I think so in this way, Granite and Obsidian are a very, when I was at the partner briefing for from the watsonx team, earlier in the year, I was very pleased to see that IBM was taking such a intellectually rigorous approach to this, right? However, the lawsuits may be adjudicated in the American jurisdiction or in the European or elsewhere, I think it's a very honest thing for IBM to come and say, look, we are going to actually be explicit about what data went into this thing. And if you have an issue with it, come talk to us. Like, that's a fine way to proceed.
Look, thank you for saying that. And yeah, if there's anything that IBM probably doesn't do well is marketing ourselves. We don't like to talk about ourselves as much as we should, and we need to. But you're absolutely right. Look, we have data fact sheets for every one of the foundational models.
Yep.
Our philosophy is that people will come to their senses, and I believe this to be the case as well. By the way, our philosophy is smaller models, just like you. I mean, you got to do that just from a cost standpoint, affordability standpoint. And we have many clients that are starting to take notice, want to even run them on their PCs and whatnot. But yeah, we do fact sheets and everything else. So you know exactly what's in that model. There's nothing that's copyrighted. We take all of that. We take hate speech out. We take all of that out. Eventually, we're going to be on the right side of history there.
Well, I think the large models, were great, sort of groundbreaking proof of, I don't want to say proof of concept, but it was amazing that works, right? But then when you look at, the learnings we've had in the last year and a half, quality over quantity versus scraping the entire internet, you're like, well, there's a lot of God knows what in there. So yeah.
Well, you get a little bit of everything. If you're doing like you need a financial model or a NASA model, whatever. Point is you don't need to know how to do a poem,
right,
or whatever. That's out. It can be very directed, and you can still get the quality within a very small model. I'm with you on that. Hey, let me ask you this: you are both an innovator and a veteran in the industry, so you probably have a sense of the risks that you foresee as we go forward. What are those risks? Yeah.
So, well, let's just go for it. So in terms of like the big risks to society kind of things, I would say that there are certainly economic challenges that may come that we are not, as a society, we can't even figure out if we had a valid, we can't even get people to broadly agree whether or not we had a valid election last time around. I mean, sorry to just bring that up, but we can all agree that people don't quite agree on this, which seems insane to me, right? So there's like these kinds of things that we are like, you look at where AI is going to come. If it comes and you unlock the ability to turn electricity into movies, to turn electricity into legal briefs, the kind of economic disruption that represents is significant, right? But yet, as a society, almost don't even have the capacity to have that level of broad intersubjective coherence to say, oh, hold on, this is a big thing, So I'm just so concerned that we're going to be caught flat-footed in this way, and it leads to both societal risks for us, but also geopolitical risks for us as a nation. And of course, I'm an American, proud to be an American. I think there's a lot of great values in what we do here in America, and we have adversaries in the world who will absolutely exploit our inability to get our handle on this, thereby making the coherence problem even worse. So that's kind of the X risk stuff. I mean, there are friends of mine who are concerned about, bioweapons and these kinds of things. I think the fact that we haven't yet resolved the social media crisis is sort of, the social media teen health kind of issues are still sort of looming. That means that AI is going to be a real doozy. So there's just the society part. When it comes to technology, one of the interesting things about these LLMs is that we are just now starting to have good research coming out like this year about understanding what's in an LLM. Right, some really fantastic work coming from various research labs, and I think we'll get there. I think we'll actually have more understandable models. So the black box nature of them is, I think, for the most part, going to be something we can remediate. A problem that we do have is the nature of how LLMs works. Means that, or how an LLM works, means that we're almost certainly always going to have some hallucination issues. And when you look at the kinds of red team attacks that are being done at the data level on LLMs, that's pretty terrifying, because I think some people think, well, they're opaque right now. So, people are training up data sets, they're training up models where they inject, purposely fine tune them to emit incorrect code or emit code that installs a phantom package or the wrong package that then the attacker controls. And now they've backdoored your code base, right? That's one thing when the thing is opaque and you're like, well, I don't know what's in this LLM. Maybe someone attacked it with bad data and fine-tuned it. But when you get things to be more transparent, you might think that's a remediation for this. The problem is the more transparent we make the LLMs, the more tools the attackers also have to surgically tweak and implant things. So the LLM seems like it's fine until a very specific set of prompts are given to it. And you would have a very hard time backing that out. It's almost like a one-way hash. So that's something which I think is sort of like the second N+1 move that I think a lot of people have not quite figured out when they talk about having transparency in the models. So then the third thing relative to Anaconda and the business itself and the risk of maybe, why do we care about Python if all these LLMs can just generate Python code, Peter? Like, why would anyone write any more Python? That's something I get quite a bit. And my view on it is this, that I think we will use LLMs to do a number of things, including writing code for us and building different kinds of things. But when you look at what people use Python to do, when you look at what people use math to do and understand, that math means something to us, right? When you have a spreadsheet, like, do you want an LLM to just tell you what next quarter sales will be? Or would you rather have it walk you through the process of here's how it did the accumulations, here's kind of the squiggle, the wiggle room in each of these predictions, here's how much the range is likely to fall in? Well, you would rather have that transparency, wouldn't you? You'd rather be able to see how is it getting to this result. I think the same thing is true of code. You can just tell the LLM, hey, write the Python code that goes and scrapes this database and retrieves these things and gives me the very best lead. Gives me the Glengarry leads or whatever, right? Well, if it does that, how do you know it really did the right thing? How do you know it didn't just like happen to screw up some code, didn't paginate, didn't go into the right database, whatever? So I think that even though LLMs can generate code, I think that we're going to have more humans reading code than writing code. So it's important for that code to be something quite legible and approachable for humans to read. And that's why Python is important, even on the back end of LLMs doing a lot of coding for us.
So it's going to be code interpretation more so.
Right. It's more like a double check. You can always take it and run it yourself and verify, right? And that feels way better than just having the LLM tell you, well, I wrote some code, I ran the code, here's the answer, trust me.
Mm-hmm. Very good answer. It's like you were preparing for this answer. How many podcasts are you doing? Are you doing a lot of podcasts?
I do probably a podcast a month. Yeah. different random ones, right? I have a lot of like philosophical things I talk about, culture things, open source things, and all that kind of stuff, as well as AI and Python tech stuff.
Getting in the philosophical, huh? What's the biggest philosophical question people are asking you?
Well, I mean, when I was on Lex Friedman, he asked me, "What is love?" or something like that, and so that was a pretty good one to end with. Thank you, Lex. But I think philosophically, one of the ones that people tend to ask about, I go on quite a bit about how I think open source is an example of a model of human collaboration that's more effective than capitalism. I'm not a communist. I'm not some Eric Cartman style, some like hippie with a drum circle. Like I have friends who are hippies that participate in drum circles, so I can say that. But I'm actually a refugee from communist China. I do like market economies. I do believe in the nature of having venture risk, participating in reward and things like that. All that's great, but at the same time, there's a lot of limitations to it. Namely, there's a sort of scarcity mindset that comes in the business models. And open source is a mode of human collaboration that is fundamentally generative, that is fundamentally participatory, and far more efficient than capitalism at producing certain kinds of results. So that is, for me, something to look towards as we look at what could AI do for us in a world where you have like South Korea talking about going to a 4-day work week, right? At South Korea, a place where people are working themselves to death, they're talking about going to a 4-day work week. We're talking about UBI here in the United States more and more. We do have to have a conversation about what are we all doing together as a society? How do we make sure we can create a sustainable and wonderful place for future generations? And AI is part of that equation. And having good market dynamics is also a part of that equation. So those are the kinds of philosophical things I talk about relative to open source and how we can learn from its principles and values.
You say you're a refugee from communist China.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on China right now, since we're off the rails already? It feels like the relationship has went back like 20 years. Am I being too dramatic?
Oh, China as a whole, that's a whole nother podcast series on its own, man. And I don't live there, but I, of course, have some connections. I read a lot about what's going on there with great interest. They are in a real estate leveraged bubble, infrastructure and real estate leveraged bubble that is going to be a really rough thing to land, especially with COVID supply chains, especially with all the saber rattling over Taiwan, with Xi Jinping basically declaring himself ongoing president for ad infinitum. These kinds of things make the rest of the world not particularly eager to rely on China as their sole provider of various kinds of high-end manufacturing and important things. And that I think is going to create economic challenges for China, which I don't know how they get through that politically. I think that it's good for countries to be self-sufficient in many ways in their supply chain. So that's why I think for the United States to be building, chip manufacturing onshore, to have a lot of our high-end manufacturing, to provide really good, well-paying vocational jobs and tech jobs for people, and broadening kind of the economic base of the middle class, to build our future in space, in medicine, in material science, and all these kinds of things, renewable energy. So, I think that's all really good for us to do. And as we do that, the Chinese economic miracle, I'm basically as old as modern China. So Deng Xiaoping took power basically the same year I was born. And that's when China started modernizing. And so this is how old China is, right? Modern China. And it popped on an economic miracle based on American exports, based on Wall Street pushing America, to offshore all this manufacturing and everything else. And now we're seeing that pendulum swing backwards. And as the tide goes out on their export trade, they're really having to do some interesting things over there. I hope it'll settle into a good place, because it's an amazing country, so many amazing people, so many smart, amazing people there. They're building electric cars like nobody's business, right? But the economic and the political hurdles are real. They're definitely real.
Wow, man. Peter, you're well spoken in a lot of different areas. I like it. We could go on forever. Hey, look, is there anything that we didn't say or you want to make sure is said on the Anaconda Python front?
I think the only thing I would bring up there that we haven't talked about is that one of the products that we did build as part of sort of coming out of the ideas from the AI Incubator is we are building a tool called AI Navigator. We've actually released it now. It's called AI Navigator, and allows people to easily download and run AI models on their local machines that are appropriate for the hardware they have. So we think that the more people's hands we get these things into, the more ways that people can write their own little AI assistants and agents, the more people will start adopting this technology in interesting ways. So that's in a way we're trying to kickstart and catalyze some of that kind of innovation. So it's not just, oh, I have to go to the great big AI cloud service in the sky. I can actually do AI things locally, have a more data private, data preserving way of doing this kind of stuff. So I would encourage people to check out AI Navigator if they're interested in that. And
Could you say a little bit more on how that works? I mean, is it downloadable via your website? I mean, how does it work?
If you just do a search for AI Navigator, Anaconda AI Navigator, you can go download it. We have curated about 200 models and quantizations that we've done of the most popular open source models that we have the rights to distribute. And then we have a nice little download system so that you don't have to download the same model over and over. It's just kind of there. And then you can have an easy way to do chats with it, generate images, things like that.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. I like it. All right. Yes. Glad you mentioned that. Anything else?
One other thing that is not AI related is continuing on our mission of democratizing Python and democratizing data science. We have the Excel integration, which is really, really wonderful as well. So in the formula bar of Excel, and this is making data simple. It doesn't get simpler than just using Excel, right? It also doesn't get as gnarly as just using Excel, let's be honest. But everyone's got Excel. And if you're on Windows and you're running Excel on Windows, not Office 365, but on Excel on Windows, you can just type equals py in the formula bar, and now you're writing Python code. You can sort of experiment and dip your toes in. Again, on the Anaconda website, we've got some information on some, getting started with Excel, with Python and Excel. And we also have a plugin that's built into Windows Excel. We also have a plugin called Anaconda Code that then works on Mac as well as Office 365 versions of Excel. And that runs Anaconda Python locally in your Excel environment. So if you want to do it that way as well, you can install additional packages and kind of play with it. So those are ways that people can now, you don't have to install Anaconda to be using Anaconda and Python, and you do it from your native data environment if that happens to be Excel.
What do you lose in terms of doing that, making it local? I mean, we were talking about it earlier in terms of, some people are going to say, well, if you go with the smaller model, depends. I mean, the model has to be unique to the use case you're driving so you can make sure that you get the outcomes. I mean, what do you lose?
When you're running a model, this is for AI Navigator, right? When you run a model, an AI model locally, what you lose is, I think it's not so much what you lose as much as the trade-off, right? The trade-off is that whatever hardware you've got, you run your model on that. So if you're on like a modern MacBook that supports MLX and that's got one of these modern chips, you can do a lot with that actually. But if you run out of headroom, now you have to upgrade your computer, or you run it on the cloud. You rent a bigger computer in the cloud. So that's the thing I would say that the trade-off you make when you run things locally is just being aware that when you don't have a lot of headroom. Once you run out of VRAM, you got to plug another card in because it's on your machine. But the good news is it's your machine, and you can do whatever you want to with it. And so if you can plug in data, if you have video streams trying to feed into it, whatever you want to do, it's all locally on your machine. You don't have to worry about uploading your sensitive tax documents into somebody's, some startup's cloud AI service or something and possibly losing that data. So that's the value of running it locally.
Awesome, man. Where can folks reach you in Anaconda?
Anaconda.com is our website. That's where you can find information on all the things I talked about today. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm open to DMs on LinkedIn. I used to have be pretty active on Twitter. I've been reducing my presence on Twitter and moving that over to Blue Sky. So I encourage people to check out Blue Sky as an alternative social media platform. But for professional purposes, LinkedIn is a really good way to reach out to me.
Have you had it with Twitter? You done with them?
That's a whole nother podcast, right? But yeah, I've been disappointed with kind of the evolution of not just the platform, but the kind of the crowd, and a lot of my friends and people who are really active in the machine learning data science Twitter world have sort of left for other things like Mastodon or Blue Sky. So that's, I'm there for the people. I'm there for the conversations.
Of course. A couple more questions. I'll let you go. First one is I'm looking for a new book. Is there a book you can recommend that's really inspired you as of late? Could be anything. I don't care what it is. It could even be self-help if that's what you're looking at.
A book that's inspired me lately. Well, I have to be honest. During the summer, I kind of did a reading spree of some of the. I binge read some of the Ian Banks culture novels that I hadn't read yet. I was just like, I'm going to read a bunch of fiction because I'm tired of reading nothing but AI and tech philosophy stuff. But in terms of, I think, an interesting book that I'm excited to read but haven't read yet, speaking of Twitter, is the book Character Limit that just came out about Elon's takeover of Twitter and kind of what happened in the aftermath of that. So that's an interesting one that looks like.
All right, got it. All right, so you were a CEO. How big is the company, can I ask?
Yeah, we're not quite 400, I think, this year, and we're growing probably another 100 beyond that next year. So
mobile company?
We are distributed. There's a large nexus of people here in Austin, Texas, but for the most part, it's pretty distributed. The executives are kind of distributed. So yeah, we are remote first.
What is your leadership style? I mean, you were the CEO. Now you're leading the AI Incubator. What style works best for you?
What style works best for me? I think definitely I'm one of those the more of the startup innovator kind of leaders, and so I really look to find good people who get it, and then give them some autonomy to do the right things. Of course, I mean, you always still have to manage people. You never get out of that. But my leadership style is I try to lead. I guess the feedback I've been given is that I try to lead with a lot of vulnerability and credibility. I'm not afraid to admit to my own mistakes. I don't particularly need to bully people into believing my whatever distorted reality version. I just try to have a very, very honest and solid read of the world and convince people of that through, credible, solid argumentation. And there's a quote of mine that I love very, very much from the author of The Little Prince. And he said, if you want to build a ship, don't go and, his name is Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And he said, if you want to build a ship, don't just go and gather a bunch of men and drum up some supplies and chop some wood and all this stuff. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And I've always loved that quote. Of course, that is never quite enough because many of them will just start paddling out to the into the blue and they will drown. So that's terrible. You do have to actually draw up plans and build a ship and put some order on the chaos. But I still I think that idea of having a North Star, having the vision, knowing why it is that you're getting people to do the things that they're doing with you and together is really, really critical.
That's great. That's great. All right. I got one last one. This is the doozy. My famous question. All right. What's true, life, tech, anything that nobody believes you on? What's true and no one else believes?
Oh, what's true? Two things, one on tech and one on life.
Nice.
What's true on tech is that all data is just frozen models. So every piece of data you see anywhere is the result of a very large and complex set of steps, each of which embeds an assumption about what it thought was interesting to capture, what level of resolution, what are the metadata, what were all the various bits and pieces. So every piece of data is a frozen model. And that model is usually invisible to you because it's some process, it's some business process, it's part of the product. Even if you take a picture with a camera, your camera is a monochrome sensor that has a Bayer matrix, RGB, in front of it to make it look like it's got color, and it's overweighted to green. And then it passes through the firmware to then munge the bits some more. So even a picture that you take with your camera is a frozen model. RGB is a model of the human eye's response to green sensitivity, right? So these are the kinds of things that I think it's important for people to think about, because even though AI is now really justifying this idea that data is really valuable, if data is the oil, these AI predictive systems are internal combustion engines. They make that oil valuable. And so people are going to get more and more jealous about their data. And so ironically, just as people are starting to get really more and more jealous about their data, that's when they're going to have to really understand that data is just frozen models. So if you want timely prediction, you want to put a sensor as close in the field as possible to get that live data and to get that liveness of the stream. And I think that's the world we're moving to. Not today, not next year, but 10 years from now, I think the truth of this will really have played out in the market. All the big players will have melded prediction and sensing with the data storage. So the data storage becomes it's not the central thing at all. It's a prediction. And I call that cybernetics. I mean, it's not just me. Everyone calls it cybernetics. But the cybernetic revolution is what's actually coming. That's the truth about tech. The second thing that's true about life is Man was invented by water to carry itself uphill.
Say that again. Man was invented
by water to carry itself uphill.
That's a great, man. I'm gonna have to. Can I tweet that?
You can tweet that all you want to. I stole it from a Bash Fortune, in 1996 or something like that. So,
that's great.
It's not me, but it can come via me. But it's one of those things that the more you think about it, the angrier you get at how true it is and how screwed up it is. That's the truth.
Awesome, man. You are awesome. You like the new role? Do you like it better than the CEO role?
Oh my God. Yes. I mean, it's so much nicer to be able to actually, there's, it's like everything, there's pluses and minuses, but for the most part, I'm definitely tech innovation is sort of what's in my blood. That's what I love doing. That's where,
awesome.
That's what I love doing. So I really appreciate the chance to focus on that. So
thank you so much for being here, Peter.
Thank you, Al. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Peter Wang, everybody, Anaconda. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Look, team, thank you for listening. Hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. And until next time, as always, we will see you on the podcast. Later on. Bye-bye.